All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back with another episode today. On today's episode titled Cutman 101, a masterclass, how to be the cut man for anybody all day long and cut like a pro. Today's video is brought to you by Armor Construction. Check out our website, link is in the bio. If you guys have any home restoration needs, feel free to go online and give us a call. So with that out of the way, let's get into the video. So in today's video, we are going to be talking about long versus short angles. And what do I mean by that? So let's draw up a 2x4 on this piece of paper. So first off, a 2x4 is actually 3.5 inches wide. It's not 4 inches, just for your information. So this will be a role play where I'll be playing as the cut man with this imaginary 2x4 we have here. I'm going to give you the same dimensions for each cut, but show you the difference between a long and a short. So for today, the dimensions are going to be a 4-inch board at 35 degrees. So let's start with long. For long and short, it's both going to start the same. So I'm sitting there at the cut table, and the guy who got the measurements, he goes, I need a 4-inch board at 35 degrees from the long. So what I'll do is I'll take my 4-inch mark on my tape measure, and I'll make my mark, like you see there. Then what I'll go ahead and do is I'll use my speed square, and I'll make my straight line. The top would be my long, and the bottom would be my short. The most important thing to know when making a long angled cut is that once you make your 4-inch mark, it's not going to get any bigger than 4 inches. So what that means is I'm going to take my speed square and make sure that my angle isn't representing anything that's going to increase the length of the board. So there's a few major things that you need to look out for when making this cut. First off, I want to make sure that my angle is in the correct position. I also want to make sure that my angle is absolutely flush with the top of the line and the top of the board where I marked the 4 inches. I also want to make sure that my pivot point is also flush with the bottom of the board and that my 35-degree angle is matching flush with the bottom of the board that I haven't cut off yet. So now that everything's in place and ready to mark, what I'll simply do is go ahead and I'll scribe my line. If we look, we have 4 inches at the top, which is the long. And if you notice at the bottom here, we have 1.5 inches. If I were to take my 4-inch mark and start at the short end and make my angled line, my board would be too big. And the guy who gave you that measurement wouldn't be very happy. And you wasted a board. Hence why it is so important to know the difference between long and short. So let's get into short. If you guys have enjoyed the video so far, please leave a like and drop a comment. If you guys are teaching anybody any classes with students or anything like that, leave a comment as well. That'd be pretty cool to know how many people we are impacting with this basic knowledge of long versus short. So without further ado, let's get into marking short angles. The guy making the measurements goes up to you and says, hey, I got a 4 inches at 35 degrees from the short. The most important thing to know is that your board is actually going to end up being longer than 4 inches. Instead of where the long cut, the maximum length for that board was 4 inches. So the same 3 rules applies to what we did for the long cut, except for we're going to start a little bit differently. We're going to make sure that our pivot point is flush with the bottom of the straight line that we created at the 4-inch mark. We're going to make sure that our 35-degree angle is flush with the bottom of the board that we haven't cut off yet. And the thing that I kind of like is that I get to use the pivot point and I don't necessarily have to worry about this so much. So now that we know we have 35 flush to the bottom of the board and our pivot point is flush with the straight line we created, I can go ahead and scribe my line. As you can see here, we actually gained distance from the 4-inch mark. We're sitting a little bit over 6.5 inches. And this portion of the board here is the board that you'd cut and give to the guy that gave you the measurements. He'd look at that cut and go, dang, that's a good cut.